Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. My name is Helen Arteaga. I am the CEO of Elmhurst Hospital here. I want to wish everyone a happy Asian American Pacific Heritage Month. Thank you for joining this forum today, as we are going to be joined by a lot of special guests that not only support the hospital, but believe in the work that we're doing. Recently, we have seen and witnessed horrible attacks against our AAPI brothers and sisters. This forum is going to be help to us to raise awareness about the devastating effects of this bias and also offer tips on how, as community members, we can stay safe but also support. Elmhurst Hospital is a diverse community of over 1.3 million residents in Queens. We have a staff of over 4,000 plus members. We strive every day to embody and respect every people from different diverse cultures and backgrounds. So on behalf of the healthcare team, I want to say that we firmly support and stand by our AAPI community brothers and sisters. We stand united with you and you're not alone. I will work hard as I can to be allies against this horrible hatred against our community, because you are part of our community. Anyone that makes this type of discrimination based on race or culture is not only fighting against you guys, it's also fighting against every other person of color. I want to take this opportunity to celebrate our many contributions made by our AAPI community members, not only to this nation, but to our Elmhurst family. The many doctors and nursing, administrative, and support staff of AAPI descent here at Elmhurst, thank you for putting your lives and working so hard during the pandemic of COVID-19. You have saved thousands of lives. I would like to thank Congresswoman Grace Mann, who's joining us here today, not only for being a fearless advocate for this hospital and our community, but showing up and passing an amazing law yesterday that not only sets the standard, but also shows that one person can make a difference. So we're very grateful for that. Our Queens District Attorney, Melinda Katz, who's no stranger to Elmhurst, as when she was past borough president, but now as district attorney, always supporting this hospital and our families and our community. Also, I want to welcome joining us today, Officer Kwok from the NYPD. Thank you so much for your fantastic work and protecting here our Queens residents, and a fantastic journalism and a trailblazer herself in her own right, Betty Nguyen. Thank you so much for all of you joining us today. And with that, I want to hand off to no stranger to someone here at Elmhurst, our amazing Dr. Eric Way, who's the Senior Vice President and Chief Quality Officer at New York City Health and Hospital. One of our healthcare leaders, not only in the system, but here at Elmhurst, who has been passionately helping us and fight over this discrimination against our beloved brothers and sisters. Today, he's going to be moderating our forum, and I thank you again for sharing this important afternoon with us, and I hope we get to learn a lot from each other. Thank you, Dr. Eric Way.
Thank you so much, Helen. It's my honor and pleasure to be able to moderate for this powerhouse panel today for this critically important conversation. And so without further ado, let's get to some of our esteemed panelists here. I'm going to introduce them right before they give their comments. And so first up is Grace Meng, our U.S. Congresswoman for the 6th Congressional District of New York. Congresswoman Meng is serving her 5th term in the U.S. House of Representatives. She represents a 6th congressional district encompassing the New York City borough of Queens, including West Central and Northeast Queens. She is the first and only Asian American member of Congress from New York State and the first female Congress member from Queens since the former VP nominee Geraldine Ferrero. Congresswoman Meng has passed several pieces of legislation into law, and we're honored to have her here today to describe her most recent and important piece of legislation that addresses violence against the Asian American community. Congresswoman?
Thank you so much, Dr. Wei, and thank you to my good friend Helen, our Elmhurst CEO, and everyone at the Elmhurst family for hosting this event today. I will echo some of what Helen said and how incredibly grateful we are to the Elmhurst community, who, as you all know, over a year ago was really the epicenter of the pandemic across the country. And we are so thankful for all of our frontline workers who've sacrificed so much throughout this past year. and just really honored to represent Elmhurst Hospital in Washington, D.C. Special thank you to our Queens District Attorney, Melinda Katz, and her team, Michael Brobner, I think I see. Thank you for being so receptive to just working so closely with the community over this past year as well. Same to Officer Kwok. And a special thank you to Betty Nguyen. You know, many people talk about these incidents, and that's sort of been an increase in the reports that we've seen over the last few months. But Betty and her team and her leadership, they've been talking about this over at her channel, her station for about the entire last year. And we really can't say that of everyone. So especially as someone with such a wide platform, Betty, we really appreciate your leadership. It's great to be here with all of you. I actually do have to hop off early, but I sort of have a good excuse. I'm headed to the White House. President Biden is signing our legislation, the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act. This is legislation that would do a few things, and DA Katz will continue to work with the federal government to show us how we could implement it robustly and correctly. But really just wanting to make sure that we are getting more data to the federal government. There are too many law enforcement jurisdictions across the country that report zero hate crimes to the federal government. And as with any public health crisis, like gun violence, for example, we want to make sure that our government is at the very least collecting data and knowing where things are happening and what's happening. Most jurisdictions across the country reported zero hate crimes in the last year. So this is something that, you know, we need to, you can't really mend a problem until you can measure the problem. And so we want to make sure that we're getting that data over to the federal government. We've all heard about the statistics, 6,600 incidents reported across the country over the last year. Those statistics are really due to the generosity of a local nonprofit group, Stop AAPI Hate. And as wonderful as they are, they should not be responsible for collecting data for the entire country, the media outlets, different levels of government to be using as we address this issue. This bill would also provide dedicated personnel at the Department of Justice who can work with local entities to make sure that we're making it easier for people to report these incidents, that we're providing proper outreach to victims, and to maybe provide a system where we can report these cases online and in different languages. And I do want to be clear, as thrilled as I am to see this legislation pass into law, this is only one small puzzle piece of the larger solution. As many of us have seen, and Officer Kwok probably knows better, many of the incidents, I think almost half in New York City, the perpetrators have suffered from mental health issues. So let's think of ways and let's use this opportunity. And I know Elmhurst has been a leader in this to make sure we as government are investing more robustly in mental health programs, whether that is for the victims or whether that is for the perpetrators. And the last piece that I want to talk about is education. You know, I was born and raised in this country, but really did not learn too much about the contributions of different communities to this country. I didn't learn too much about the Chinese Exclusion Act. I didn't learn too much about Japanese American incarceration camps, or even slaves building the US Capitol, the very place where I work. And so if we want to be serious in the long term and breaking down the walls of biases and stereotypes, we have to address the incomplete teaching of American history that our children are learning. And this is a great opportunity. Elmhurst Hospital is a beautiful mosaic and a beautiful example of what America looks like. And I will say, as an Asian American, during this tough year, there have also been silver linings. I, in my life, have never felt and seen such a widespread showing of support from so many people beyond the Asian American community. And sometimes the muscle and the vocabulary of the Asian community, their advocacy muscles are a little newer, a little younger. And we have benefited from the friendship and the allyship of the Jewish community, Black, Latino, LGBTQ, you name it. People have literally tried to take us under their wing and stood in solidarity with us and share best practices. And this is what Elmhurst and what Queens is all about. And even though we live and work in such a diverse community, we don't necessarily do that enough. And so I view that as a silver lining, that we are learning new ways where we can partner together and be stronger and, you know, make progress in solidarity. So thank you so much, Elmhurst, for all that you do. And on top of that, providing this space where we can come together to protect all of our communities together. Please be safe and healthy.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Meng. Thank you for being a champion. Very glad to hear that you're headed to the White House. Please give our thanks not only to yourself, but to Senator Hirono and President Biden for signing this critically important piece of legislation into law. And thank you for your continued support of Queens, Elmhurst, in New York City. I'm going to introduce our Queens District Attorney next, Melinda Katz. She was elected in November of 2019 as the first woman to serve as Queens County District Attorney in the city of New York. Under uniquely challenging circumstances related to COVID-19, she has dedicated herself as DA to ensuring the safety of the 2.25 million plus people who live, work, and visit here while implementing meaningful changes in the criminal justice system. We are so pleased to have Melinda join us to describe her office's role in preventing and prosecuting biased crimes. District Attorney.
Dr. Way, thank you so much, and to Helen, of course, and everyone in the Elmhurst family. It's, as the Congresswoman is saying, you know, if I had a dime for everyone at home, they had to leave a meeting to meet with the president. You know, it's amazing what you've done, Congresswoman, and I thank you for that. I also think it's just really cool to have to leave a meeting to go to a presidential signing and all that you have done and worked for. So thank you so much. Queens DA now, Hops, the Borough President's Office. It is here for us. And, you know, we target Asian crimes as if it's only in the last year that it's gone up in the city of New York. I just want to note that it's not only in the last year, but in the 5 years previously, there's been a dangerous trend in the United States of America. And we can't just prosecute our way out of it. You know, we talk a lot about hate crime prosecutions, and no doubt about it that is part of combating hate crime, which is holding people accountable for the actions that they take solely based on someone's ethnic background, their religion, who they choose to love. And there is a step up in the crime when it comes to motivation for that. And there's a reason for that, because it's particularly dangerous when people around you choose you simply because of your background, the ethnicity that you are, who you choose to love, religion, how you're speaking, all of that. And so in Queens, look, we have been holding people accountable. And at the same time, we've been doing other things to make sure that we combat hate crime. You know, we, as a cultural aspect, you know, Queens is 190 countries and 200 languages. Many of you are used to me saying that as the borough president. But as the DA, it's almost become ultimately most important, because the truth of the matter is, as we're working together and living together, there's a higher bar to how we need to treat each other, since there are so many different backgrounds in the same borough. Now, I would say that the ethnic diversity is the gift that we give the rest of the United States of America. They should be so lucky as to have our diversity that we have here in Queens County. But when someone doesn't behave appropriately, when they are acting illegal because of protect, that's my job, in order to make sure that we are prosecuting, you know, the hate crimes. You know, for instance, 1 week ago, I announced an indictment that I know has been spoken about on many of these forums. We announced the indictment in the Queens County grand jury on charges for attacking a 52-year-old Asian woman outside a bakery. on February 16th. The victim was shoved so hard that she had stitches. I think it was about 10 stitches, a dozen stitches in her head. And the defendant is waiting arraignment in Supreme Court on an indictment charged with aggravated harassment in the second degree, which means that the hate crime is an element of that crime, that she was chosen for that particular reason. You know, we took a little while to get there because I do need to investigate and make sure that the elements of the crime that we are alleging are able to stand. And so with the investigations, with the phone, with text, with all of the things that we found, we were able to charge that to show that you cannot just target someone because of their ethnicity. We do have a hate crimes number. It's 718-286-7010-7010. My hate crimes chief is on this call, Michael Brobner. He will be sticking around to answer any questions. But I think it's particularly important for Elmhurst Hospital because you are in a unique position. You know, I think your hospital services the most diverse population in the United States, if I'm not mistaken. And you are uniquely capable and in a position of being able to identify what might be hate crimes when they come in, when people need help. And it's important that you carry the message that not only will we take hate crimes seriously, whether you are a victim or whether you are a witness, your immigration status is irrelevant to the Queens District Attorney's Office. We worry about protecting individuals. We do not worry about immigration status. We do not talk to the feds about immigration status. It makes no difference as to whether you can be a witness. It makes no difference as to whether we will protect you. We will. And so I wanted to make sure that we get that message out. It's extremely important in a borough that is so clearly diverse. And Elmhurst, I'm only going to end with this. You have been making a charge, which is to take care of people, to make sure that when someone walks into that emergency room or into your doors, that you understand them, that you're culturally sensitive to the issues at hand, and that you understand that people are coming from all over the world just to come to the borough of Queens County. And Elmhurst Hospital has continued to be on the front line, not only with COVID, but throughout the decades that I've been around. And yes, I have been around for decades. And Elmhurst Hospital has always been at the forefront of almost everything we do here in Queens County. So thank you so much for your leadership.
Thank you so much, District Attorney. And you know, you're right about Elmhurst Hospital and New York City Health and Hospitals, that the best part of our mission is the last two words, without exception. Anyone who comes through our doors, without exception. It's great to hear that you have not just all of our AAPI community members back without exception as well, but that you're defending against all types of bias and hate. So thank you so much. I'm going to now introduce NYPD Officer William Kwok from the Community Outreach Division, Immigrant Outreach Unit. Officer Kwok started as a police officer in 2012, working in the 101st Precinct before transferring to the 110th Precinct, where he served the Asian population in Elmhurst as a steady sector patrol officer. Eventually, he transferred into the Community Affairs Bureau, Community Outreach Division, where he is currently the Asian liaison in the Immigrant Outreach Unit. Being of Chinese descent, he speaks both Cantonese and Mandarin, but also serves as a bridge between the NYPD and all Asian immigrants within the 5 boroughs. We are proud to welcome Officer Kwok with us today to share how criminals are held accountable for their crimes and tips on how the public can report crimes and keep themselves safe. Officer Kwok.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate everyone's time to stop by and hear us out at this meeting. I feel like I'm back at home. I mean, the 110 covers Elmhurst General Hospital, and I gotta tell you, we spent a lot of time going to the hospital, and the amount of professionalism that was there was absolutely breathtaking, because we brought all sorts of different people that needed assistance, and as was mentioned before, Elmhurst has never turned anyone down, and we were always able to get the help that we needed for them. So thank you guys very much for everything that you guys do, and you know, keep at it. But with that said, before I start, I would like to have my commanding officer speak a few words. Just briefly, she is the commanding officer of both the Outreach and Youth Strategies Division. She's always out there connecting with communities and our youth across the city. She's also been incredibly supportive with our efforts to provide outreach to the AAPI communities. I can't thank her enough for her support in my work in assisting with these AAPI communities as well. That being said, I present to you Deputy Inspector Victoria Perry.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Officer Kwok. Thank you all. Thank you to the panelists and everyone who has brought us here today. Officer Kwok said it all. There's not much I can go on with behind that elaborate introduction, but I will say to you, Youth Strategies Division is another entity under Community Affairs that's available to you. With this hate crime that's going on, we have our youth that we need to be concerned of too, because they themselves are also in fear. So we want to let you know that we have services there. We have different events, different forums that we hold for the youth, and we want you to know that those services are available to the youth. On top of that, you also have Officer Kwok, who is there for you in every step of the way, who will actually provide services, speak at any panelist that you need, tell you what we do, offer anything that you might need, and also support you in every aspect possible. I'm here to support every last one of you, but I'm sure you're in good hands with Officer Kwok, and I'll let him continue on with his introduction.
Thank you very much, Inspector. So a couple of things I wanted to cover, as we were mentioned before, as the Asian liaison, I do come out and try to provide a little bit of information to our communities, including how to stay safe, what can you do if you're in the midst of a possible hate crime, and also what you can do as a bystander. When we talk about crime, a lot of times we talk about the ability of a perpetrator to do the crime, and also as well as what they hope to achieve from that crime. But we also talk about opportunity. And now, while we can't control, what a perpetrator or a person wants to do, or or what they hope to achieve from it, we can't control the opportunity, which brings us to this this issue of safety, on the streets, whether it's transit or it's on the streets. We want to eliminate the opportunity. And how do we do that? We do that a lot of times by just simply paying attention. Unfortunately, a lot of times, we're in a very busy sort of environment. We're always constantly looking at something, usually it's our phone, or we're busy walking the street. So we're not really focusing on around us. But that awareness is what's critical, because a lot of times these perpetrators, they do try to sneak up on you, or they try to do something while you're not paying attention. So as long as you're paying attention, you're looking around, they don't see that opportunity, they're not likely to try to come to you and do that. Obviously, we don't want them to target anyone else. Which brings me to the issue of us, calling 911. As anyone who has, worked with the AAPI community, one of the biggest things we have is an underreporting issue. Unfortunately, a lot of times with the AAPI community, they're a little resistant to the idea of calling to the police for any assistance. There's two main factors that we always see. The first one is concern about immigration status. Now, as the Queen's DA, Melinda Katz, mentioned before, we don't ask about your immigrant status. We never have, we never will. And we want anyone, whether they're a victim or a witness, to feel comfortable coming to us and then letting us know that something has happened to us. That's our purpose. We want to make sure you feel protected. So when you come to us, we'll never ask about your immigration status. But the second thing that we run into very frequently is a language issue. A lot of the AAPI communities, especially if they're new immigrants, they just got to this country, they don't necessarily speak English. And now the wonderful thing about our 911 dispatch is we have access to the language line. So if any community is trying to speak with our dispatch and they're not necessarily comfortable, they can actually ask to speak to someone in their language. And it doesn't have to be complicated. They don't have to necessarily know how to say, I need this person. Sometimes if they can try to speak in their language, or at least try to use the English word for the language. So in the case of, for example, Chinese person, they could say something like Chinese. Our dispatch will know, okay, I need to connect this person to someone who speaks Chinese. So by eliminating these two tremendous factors, it helps to increase the amount of reporting we're hoping to see come from this. But so that brings us to the next part, which is, what should you do? Should you become in the midst of a possible hate crime? Well, the first thing you should do is try to remove yourself from the situation if possible. We know that's not always necessarily possible, but if you need to defend yourself, we also, would like you to know that you are within your rights to defend yourself, but understand that up until the point where you're defending yourself, that's okay. once you've been able to remove yourself from the situation, then please reach out to us. Let us know that something like this has happened, because then we can go and address the situation. We don't want this to continue and move on to another victim. So letting us know is one of the most critical things that you can do. So when you're in that situation, defend yourself and then remove yourself from that situation as soon as possible. If you're a witness to something like this, we all have cell phones nowadays. Please pull out that cell phone, call us, and then if you can, record it. Hate crimes in their very nature are heinous, but when it comes to prosecution, I know this falls under Queen's DA Melinda Katz's office, but when it comes to prosecution, the best thing we can do to assist in that situation is by providing as much evidence as possible. A regular crime is easy to prove, but with hate crime, we must prove intent. So if you're able to, as a witness, pull out your cell phone and record such a thing and then provide it to the police, it really genuinely helps us bring these heinous individuals who are committing these crimes to justice. So just as a quick recap, we want everyone to be able to kind of, try to pay attention to your surroundings so that you kind of eliminate that opportunity for something to happen. But if something should happen, please feel comfortable and knowing that you can reach out to the police department, and we will do everything within our power to assist you. As a brief side mention, we also have the Asian Hate Crimes Task Force. They're also frequently out there to try to assist as well. If you do report a crime, they will generally try to reach out to assist you as well, whether it's in your own language. They have 25 detectives that speak all sorts of different languages so that they can help with the case when it comes to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Officer Kwok and Inspector Perry. I think there are a lot of great pearls there on how to keep ourselves safe, know that NYPD is there behind us, want to hear the reports, but also tips on how to become an upstander and not just a bystander when these heinous crimes are occurring. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
Next one,
I'm sorry, if I could just pin one more thing.
Sure.
Absolutely. The number one question is always using something to protect themselves. And I know a lot of females wonder if it's safe or legal to carry pepper spray. That's the number one question. I want to let it be known that yes, it is. It's safe. It's legal to carry pepper spray, and you can use it to defend yourself. It's the matter of how you use it is when it becomes a crime, so to say, or a violation. So that's the number one question that we always get when we're on these panelists and we're talking, because people want to protect themselves and they want to make sure that they're safe. So I just wanted to put that out there so they know.
Thank you so much. Okay, next I'd like to introduce Betty Nguyen. Betty is an anchor for Pix 11 Morning News, weekdays from 7 to 11 a.m. She joined WPIX from NBC and MSNBC, where she anchored the Early Today and First Look. She was also a correspondent for the Today Show and fill-in news anchor for Weekend Today. Prior to that, she anchored several CBS news shows and the weekend edition of CNN Newsroom. We're delighted to have Betty join us today to discuss the media's role in raising awareness about hate crimes. Betty?
Hi, good afternoon. Dr. Wei, nice to see you again. I interviewed Dr. Wei this morning, and he had such a powerful story to talk about how this is affecting not only our community as Asian Americans, but also himself personally. So I do appreciate it. And I'll talk a little bit more about the importance of that in just a moment. But for a member of the media, in order to tell this story, we have to have the information. And that's why it's so important for all of us to come together and make sure that reporting is forefront here, because without the reporting, we don't have the information. And without that, it's very hard to keep this in the spotlight. So let me give you just kind of an idea of where we are with it so far. In the last year, there's been more than 6,600 cases reported against Asian Americans, that being violence against Asian Americans. There was a study of hate and extremism at California State, which released a full-scale study, which says that attacks were up 150%. Now, let's talk about New York City alone, right? Anti-Asian American attacks rose in 2019. They were just 3 in 2019. And in the past year, 2020, they rose to 28. That is an increase of 833%. So even though the numbers seem kind of small, these numbers don't tell the full story. They don't tell the full story because not everyone is reporting, and that is part of the problem. So I do want to commend Congresswoman Meng for all the efforts that she's done, because I think the bill that she was able to pass, and she's with the president right now signing that, is very important because it's allowing people to report this in their language. It makes it more accessible because we already know there is a system of silence within the Asian American community simply because there is a major fear, a fear of immigration status, a fear of what's going to happen if I'm reporting, a fear of the system in general. So this allows that to help happen more easily. Also, the Justice Department is going to get involved, and that will help us with the numbers. But numbers don't just tell the story. You tell the story. Those of us within the community tell the story. And I think it's important for us to understand that we have to use our voices and we have to speak up, because without that, our stories go unheard and we will continue to see violence that doesn't get reported, and therefore the scope of it doesn't get reported. And if we cannot keep it in the news, then how can we combat the problem? So let's talk a little bit about that, because the severity of these crimes is atrocious. I know that you've seen some of the headlines, but there have been beatings that have left people in a coma. You know, the local man who was just picking up cans to make ends meet because he lost his job during the pandemic, beaten into a coma. There's a Vietnamese man out in Indiana who was kidnapped and dismembered. There were women in Atlanta who were shot and killed. These are serious, serious crimes that are shocking and disheartening and creates a system of fear within our communities. So this issue is so very important. I want to thank the New York Health and Hospital System in Elmhurst for putting this forum together, because I think it's very, very important. So what can we do about it? How do we get the media to keep this in the forefront of the headlines and make sure that we can make a difference, make a dent in this problem? Well, I think one thing is you have to make sure that people feel comfortable to speak up. You have to be an ally, right? And you have to talk to your friends and family members and let them know if they see something, they have to say something. And I also think it's important that victims and family members and their friends and family tell their story. I know it can be hard. I know it can be very difficult, especially as a victim, to go on television and tell your story. But in order for people to care, they have to see you. They have to see us in the community. They have to see that hurt. They have to see the reality of the situation, because otherwise it's just a number and just a name, someone that we may not even know. But if you tell their story, if you're a family member or a friend, speak up, speak out, talk to the media. We can help get the information out there. I also think it's important to coordinate with local social justice groups and learn from them, become allies. We've seen the power of the Black Lives Matter unification and how they've been able to make great strides. Did that happen overnight? No. It took many, many decades to get to this point, but we're starting to see some progress in it. And granted, there's more that needs to become. But I think as Asian Americans, we come from many different countries, many different cultures, many different languages. We have not learned to band together as one and own our power. And there is power in numbers. So we have to learn to coordinate with others who have been there and know how to use the system and know how to get justice within the system. I also think we need to create spokespeople that will contact the media, that will say, you know what, we're having an event, we need you to be there. A lot of times the media is fickle. You know, headlines change by the minute sometimes, and it's hard to stay in the spotlight. The only way that we can keep this in the spotlight is to keep talking about it. And so it's important to create spokespeople. I also think coordinated events around this is very important. I've spoken to many people within the community who have come on our show simply because they let me know, hey, we're having an event about this, and this is important, why? And therefore, we try to get them the spotlight on the show, to get some kind of interview or some kind of coverage so that we make sure that this story stays in the eye of viewers. It stays relevant because it is relevant. Unfortunately, we're having cases daily of people being injured within our community. And, you know, and the sad thing about this is these are the elderly folks within our communities. These are, many of them, women who don't have the ability to defend themselves. It's like those who are most vulnerable are the ones who are being targeted. And that's the story that we have to continue to tell, because we have to, as we saw the Officer Kwok talk about, you have to get people to protect themselves. You have to give them the information so they know what to do. And I also think that we can't let people sit there and tell us, especially after the Atlanta shootings, that, you know, this was just a bad day. We can't let people get away with excuses like this is, yes, I understand mental illness is an issue, but at the heart of this, there was a really violent act, and those stories do need to be told, and we have to hold people accountable for their actions. And we heard the district attorney talk about that. And so I just want, you know, to kind of end with the fact that in order to continue to keep this in the spotlight, it requires all of us. And that's why I think this forum is so very fantastic, because it's a way for us to talk about it. And when we stop talking about it, that's when we can possibly have a bigger problem.
Thank you so much, Betty, and thank you for all that you're doing of keeping this in the spotlight and the attention through your platform on anti-AAPI hate. So before we move on to our question and answer section, I just want to reflect on some of the things that I've heard today. You know, Betty mentioned that I was on with her early this morning, and then there was actually a Metro Plus anti-Asian hate forum between these two with the Commissioner on Human Rights of New York City and Lieutenant Governor Kathy Hochul from the state. So a lot of what I do within quality and safety for New York City Health and Hospitals is to think about systems, think about root causes. And so I think there's obviously been long-standing racism, bias, implicit bias, explicit bias, structural injustices and racism. That's not new. I think just kind of what Betty mentioned of just how heinous some of these crimes are being caught on video is just bringing it to the forefront of our attention. But thinking about, you know, what were the root causes of this, right? Asian Americans have had a long history in the story of this country in America, coming from many different countries, often escaping oppressive governments. And so, you know, why are they afraid to speak up and go to the government? You know, that's the whole reason they fled and they immigrated. You know, building the railroads, being subjected to attacks. I remember doing a high school research project on how Asian Americans working on the railroads in California were, you know, frequently attacked, their houses burned down, subjected to almost, you know, essentially lynchings of sort. And so, right, education. How are we teaching our next generations about the role of Asian Americans? You know, the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II is probably one of the ugliest chapters in our history, and do we teach that to our children? But I think we even need to look that far back, right? Breaks my heart that my colleagues, the nurses, the doctors, the healthcare heroes that left their homes to walk to the subway station, ride the subway, to walk to the hospital, to our nursing homes, to our clinics, to save lives. Many of our Asian healthcare workers losing their lives to COVID-19, still dealing with the emotional, psychological trauma, the mental health crisis that is our parallel pandemic. And to add this on top of it, to be scapegoated, to be blamed for this virus and now being attacked just because of the way that they look, breaks my heart, makes me incredibly sad, incredibly angry. I see my sister, I see my parents in every one of these attacks. And so, you know, I think this forum and forums like this is just the first step to bring attention to it. But what are the root causes and what are the corrective action plans or the actions that we're going to take to address those root causes so that it makes a lasting difference, not just, right, making sure that, you know, we have these stats, but that, you know, doesn't matter if we're collecting if it keeps happening, right? How do we stop it from happening? So I think that is the challenge that faces all of us today. So why don't we go to the questions from the audience?
So we had one question that is probably best answered by the Officer Kwok and the NYPD. So it's a question about how long will it take when someone files an application to the police department regarding the crime and release the CC camera footage. And the question was around whether it could be private cameras or it could be NYPD New York City cameras as well.
Okay. So to be completely specific here, when you're requesting camera footage for the department, because for cameras that may be owned by the city or by the department, that typically has to go through a FOIL application. I don't have the specific timeframes for those because it depends on the nature of the case. Depends on what the investigation is. So every case is different. So there is no specific time frame. When it comes to private camera footage, that's very dependent on the private entity themselves. Certain facilities or certain locations, the larger ones, they may require a warrant before that footage can be released. So again, there's no real specific time frame that I'd be able to provide to you, but with each case, if you're involved in a case where you're personally, involved as a victim, a lot of that information, you kind of have to go through your detective to kind of talk to them. If you're in an outside entity and you're trying to get more information on a specific case, that's something that would have to go through FOIL. And again, like I said, the individual entity may choose to release it to you. They may choose not to. And if they choose not to, and it's got to go through the police department, that's something that typically follows through on a warrant. Hope that answers that question.
And we thank you. We have another question regarding pepper spray, and I guess the comment was, what is the difference between using it illegally versus legally? Okay.
So there's a tremendous thing. I actually wanted to follow up on that. The inspector was kind enough to bring that to as a topic. So before we jump into the legalities of it, the first thing is getting it legally versus getting it illegally. I know today we have a lot of options. We go to Amazon, we go to a lot of different online stores, and we just decide to purchase them. Sometimes even if we're in a different state, we decide to purchase it. New York City has very specific laws governing pepper spray. There's a specific ratio of chemicals that need to be followed. So if you buy them from an outside source, there's no guarantee that you're buying the proper one, and that in itself could be illegal. With that being said, the proper places to buy them from, a lot of pharmacies do sell them. Certain self-defense stores within New York City do sell them, but make sure that you're purchasing them from a credible location as opposed to online or out of state. Moving on to the actual question itself, legal versus illegal. So essentially, if you are using it in a manner of self-defense, someone's attacking you, you pull it out to spray them, you're well within your rights. So as I mentioned during my my presentation, you can do anything you need to defend yourself. Once the threat stops being a threat and you continue to use it, that turns illegal because you're no longer defending yourself. Now you're attacking someone. So essentially, the difference between legal and illegal is whether you're defending yourself or you're using it preemptively to attack someone else, or if you're using it during the commission of a crime. So if you're committing it during another crime and you're using pepper spray, that will definitely get you in trouble. And then on top of that, if it's no longer self-defense and you're using it in an offensive manner, that will also get you in trouble.
Thank you, officer.
Thank you.
Something else that I've also heard and recommended to me by NYPD officers is using sound. There are personal alarms that you can get, and often like a really loud alarm, really loud sound, or a big group of people coming to assistance, drawing attention to the crime that's happening can be a huge deterrent. Is that something that you would recommend as well?
Absolutely. That's the most non-offensive way. We talk about offensive tools and defensive tools. Pepper spray is considered kind of an offensive tool because you're using it and it's affecting the person who's attacking you. Whereas if you're using something like a personal alarm device, which is one where if you pull it apart, it emits a very loud beeping, that would draw the attention of others. that becomes a defensive tool where you're using, or you're using it and it's really just to draw attention. It's an excellent tool. But if not everyone has access to it, if you can find a whistle, even whistles, again, that gets a lot of attention. You don't necessarily need a personal alarm device because, again, you have to buy that. But whistles are a great tool to use that too. They make a lot of noise. They draw a lot of attention. And that's another excellent way. I'm glad you brought that up. That's also going to be used in a way that can protect yourself.
Okay, and there was another question related to how to protect yourself around are tasers legal to use?
So tasers are they're kind of a gray area. As a department, we generally don't recommend that you use a taser. I can't speak on the legalities of it specifically because, again, I mentioned that it's a gray area. We don't suggest it because at the end of the day, it is a tool that you can use, but it's also a tool that can be taken from you and used against you as well. So at the end of the day, I don't really recommend it. Legality-wise, I don't have an answer for that one. That's kind of a gray area.
Okay, we had a question about how to, I guess, speak to the reporters about the incidents. How let's see, what are the tips on how we engage the media in not only bad stories, but good stories too?
Well, thankfully, social media has the ability to access all of us, right? And that's an easy way. If you want to reach out to any particular anchor, reporter, correspondent, many of us are on social media. You can send a direct message. That's an easy way to do it. If you want, a lot of the stations also have an assignment desk, and you just call in and you can report a story there. I'll give you ours right now. The number is 212-210-2411. Again, 212-210-2411. So if you have a story and you want to report it, you're welcome to call. And we're always looking for stories that matter. And so if you have one, good or bad, right? We would love to have good stories within the Asian American community, something that we can shine that spotlight on instead of talking about such horrendous and heinous crimes that right now during this crisis, clearly that's something that we've got to keep our eye on and keep the spotlight on.
And we had I guess this question could be for the panel. How do we begin to talk about this with our children so we make them aware but don't frighten them?
To touch on that?
Sure, I'll definitely be happy to touch on that. So essentially,
I would say for one thing, the kids aren't blindsided these days. Kids aren't blindsided these days. Like Betty said, social media is our friend. Social media has been our enemy. And the one thing it has done is introduce the kids to everything and allow them to see what's going on. So it's important, I believe, for us to be honest, but let them know their outlets and who's there to support them and how to go about getting support and protection when needed. So we can be honest as to what's going on, but we also need to let them know and educate them that the police are their friends. And if they see something, they have to say something. And if they have to call 911, call 911. It's important to teach them, what to look for as far as you want to be able to say what the person's wearing. It's important to know what shoes they are wearing, because a lot of times people change their clothing, but they don't change their shoes. So that's something that we as investigators always look at. You want to be able to identify the street that you're on, know where you're at. You want to educate your kids on knowing your location, know where you're at, be able to say where you're located at, be able to say where the incident occurred at, being able to tell them, stay in well-lit areas. Don't go somewhere dark. If you notice that it looks unsafe, if it feels unsafe, it is unsafe. We have to follow our instincts. So it's important that we educate our kids, educate each other, our friends. And also, number one, do not bury your head into your cell phones. Do not bury your head into your cell phones. That goes for all ages. I see adults walking. We've seen incidents where people losing their lives crossing streets because they're not paying attention to their surroundings. So we have to be realistic and we have to be honest with what's going on today. And we have to tell this to our kids, but we also have to protect them and let them know the resources that's available to them and tell them to call 911 because we are here for them and we will be there to protect them no matter what time of the day it is.
Thank you, Inspector. Officer Kwok?
I don't think I could follow up with anything better
Okay.
said than that. She hit everything that we wanted to hit. And I reiterate again, that cell phone, we love it. We need to get our heads out of it because it's just the amount of people who are being targeted simply because they're not paying attention is tremendous.
Betty, anything you want to add to that?
Actually had a bit of a question. We were talking about this, and I mentioned it to you, Dr. Way, a little bit earlier this morning. We were talking about it in the studio, and as Asian Americans, you know, we're starting to lift the mask rule. And speaking with people within the community, a lot of them are saying, you know what, I feel comfortable with the mask because I feel like that's a protection. And it kind of shields the fact that I am Asian American, and it might kind of disguise me, camouflage me, so that I don't feel like maybe I will be the subject of an attack. And it's really kind of sad that we have to look at living like that, right? This sense of living in fear. And I guess my question to you, Officer Kwok, what are some of the other things that we can do as Asian Americans as we walk around the streets and worry about being the target of an attack?
So, you know, it's a shame, you know, that in this day and age that they have to feel ashamed with, you know, or just feel like they have to hide their identities. That should never be the case. And you know, hearing that, this is not the first time actually you mentioning it. I've heard it before too during a lot of my presentations. And you know, it kind of goes back to the regular safety tips I was talking about. You know, that kind of, you know, observing, you know, around, making sure that someone isn't following you, watching you, you know, for no apparent reason. And you know, kind of just being aware of your situation and where you are. That's one. But going beyond that is also the other topic I covered, which was the need to report crimes and call 911 and feeling comfortable to do it. Because when you choose to make that call for something that is, you know, and you're instinctually, you're like, something is wrong, something doesn't seem right about this, but then you push it away and you choose not to do that, that affects the next person. That affects the next person that it potentially could become a victim. You choosing to say, well, that's not my problem, or it's not really something that's going to affect me. You know, that person that's acting suspicious, you know, further down the block, you know, he's been talking to himself. He's, you know, maybe there is something that's going on there mentally. We choose to kind of just ignore that and just move on with our lives. That person now essentially may lock onto another person as a target. So the actions that we choose to, or choose not to in this case, take has a direct influence on the next potential victim that could be there. And as a police department, we're out there to help people. So, you know, mental illness, as was mentioned earlier, is definitely an issue that is happening within the city. And our job there is also to bring assistance to these people. So when you call us to let us know, hey, there's someone who's behaving erratically, you know, we go down there and we get them the help that they need. So there are multiple avenues, if you would, to providing that additional safety that may not necessarily be immediate, you know. So, you know, being aware of your environment, that's an immediate way to protect yourself. But being cognizant that you can reach out to the police department to address concerns that may be occurring in your immediate environment is the long-term assistance that you can provide both to your environment and in your neighborhood. So, you know, that's the two things that I would say would definitely be very beneficial for improving the situation, if you would.
Yeah, and going back to how to have the difficult conversations with your children about racism and about bias and hate. We'll share last summer, I was feeling bad for myself about how hard it would be to teach my then 3 and 5-year-old daughters about why George Floyd died. And I remember buying books like Same, Same, But Different to read to them at bedtime, talking to them about why so many people were protesting and in the street and upset, taking my daughters to Black Lives Matter protests, and then having conversations with my Black friends about how early they need to have conversations with their sons about about racism and structural injustice, and somebody died, who looks just like their father. I didn't have the conversation to that extent, and it was really, I felt ashamed for feeling like it was so hard for me to have those conversations with my kids. Same time, I look at them, I look at their faces, and I refuse to believe that you're born with hate, that people are inherently good, and we need to tap into that kindness and that good. And it's the environment. Hate is taught, bias is taught, and learned due to kind of the systems that are in place. And I don't think it's ever too early to start having those conversations with our children, because they are our future. If things are going to get better, it is going to be our children and future generations being better than our generation. And so I don't think there's a magical way of doing this. It's very difficult. I think books help, stories help, and role models help, for sure.
I think there was one more question on just repeating the hate crimes hotline. If we don't have that response, I think we're planning to send an email at the end with some information. We can certainly include it in that.
Sounds good. Okay.
I just want to add, I'm sorry. I just want to add to that, the Asian Hate Crimes Task Force, as well as the Hate Crimes Task Force, as Betty had mentioned before, social media is a big, important tool. It's a very, very critical tool. And the New York City Police Department also engages frequently on social media. So if you were to want to have more specific questions or something that you want to go down, we have Twitter handles for both the Hate Crimes and the Asian Hate Crimes Task Force. I'll pull them up and I'll put them on the chat for everyone as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And so I want to thank all of our panelists. I know not all of them were able to stay on, but very grateful for giving us the time to share your expertise, your voice, your wisdom, and your advice. I think this is what we need to be doing more of, continuing the conversation, keeping this at the forefront, in the spotlight, as Betty had mentioned, and let's keep tapping into the good, right? People's good to overcome this, right? That's going to overcome the hate and the bias. And then we'll end with some resources that we will email out to everyone who included their email as part of their registration. So resources for anti-Aapi hate, resources for how to report, advice for staying safe, as well as legal mental health, and additional resources that will be emailed out. And anything else that panelists want to share, please send it our way, and we'll share out through this email as well. Once again, thank you so much to Helen, to Elmhurst, to Health and Hospitals for hosting this very important forum. And thank you all for taking time out of your day today to join us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you very
Bye,
much,
everyone.
everyone.
Thank you.